asatopi na bhāvasya nirodha upapadyate dvitīyasya śirasaś chedanaṃ vidyate yathā.
Asatopi bhāvasya nirodha upapadyate dvitīyasya śirasaś chedanaṃ vidyate yathā. Death is impossible, again, for a living being who is beyond being right, just as there is no cutting off of a second head. So once more, I've just translated that in a way that it seems to have most meaning to me at the moment. But at first blush, again, Nāgārjuna is still enmired in a discussion about ontology, about existence and non-existence. So in that case, asato, asataha, that's genitive singular, means non-existent. As in many places in MMK, it does mean that. In the forthcoming chapter, chapter 8, we'll be considering various permutations of sat and asat, existent and non-existent. But sat also means, well, literally it means being. It's the present participle of the verbal root as, to be. So sat means being, and hence it means existent, existing, but it also means true, real, hitting the target, or right. And so a, the negative a, means non, as in non-existent, but it also means he. In the Sanskrit equivalents of the Chinese and Japanese he, which means non, like in Hibutsu, a non-Buddha. So asat can mean non-true, which means true, but not in a way that we thought was true. And again, if sat is right, or being right, then asat confirms to, it resonates with Marjorie Barlow's principal teaching, at least when she taught me, which is the thing that gets in our way is trying to be right. So it's necessary to go beyond being right. Because being right, in any case, there is no such animal as being right. Being right is maybe the original prapancha, certainly for religious people. We form a conception that there's such a thing as being right. And so Marjorie used to say that religion is mainly about fixing. And if we go along those lines, then the ultimate sort of absolute being right is God for a religious person. I was thinking about that this morning, remembering a conversation with Kudo Nishijima, in which he said with quite amazing arrogance, really, the truth is that Dharma is Dharma, God is God. But if we say that God is Dharma, we can save all living beings in this world. Which I think, as we sat there in his office, was a little bit on the deluded side, to think that our efforts might be that important. But having said that, it does occur to me now that because when we get to chapter 27, the ultimate chapter of MMK, which is titled Exploration of Views, Drishti Pariksha, that chapter, when I translated it 2 years ago, really prompted me to abandon a view that I'd had, certainly for the last 10 or so years, a prejudice, a very strong prejudice against religion. You probably heard me, if you listened to my comments on the last verse yesterday, I was kind of expressing my depth of resentment about religious people, which comes from my history of being really devoted to serving Kudo Nishijima. And then, in fact, when I was 27, as early as 27, I was the first person, asked to receive his Dharma. But I knew I wasn't up to that task. I knew that I hadn't even begun to understand what I thought I needed to understand. So I just didn't have the confidence to accept, although I was very devoted to his teaching. But then after that, various other people did receive the Dharma, and then some of them, quite incredibly to me, started to sort of put them, because they got this new high status, especially ones who'd become a monk, which I also struggled with. But again, I didn't want to have the ceremony to become a monk because I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep celibacy. I didn't want to be a hypocrite about it. But then people who came along after me weren't worried about that. They were quite happy to follow the Japanese tradition of being a married monk, a married Zen priest, and happily receive the Dharma. And there was not one like that, there were several. And what I found is that they were following Nishijima Sensei's teaching in a kind of religious way without understanding it. And on that basis, sort of in a kind of cultish way, identifying themselves as the ones who were right. And I was the heretic, the one who was wrong. So it was quite a turnaround. A part of that was Nishijima Sensei seeing me as being on the other side, So I had plenty to be resentful about, in fairness to myself. And I think that the truth of all that stuff will come out in the end. It'll be an interesting story, as well as, I'm sure, various aspects of my own history which will not be recognised as praiseworthy. And there was much in that category as well. But the point about Dharma and God, anyway, is that for Nishijima Sensei, God is God, Dharma is Dharma. But that's a very non-empty way of looking at things, you see. And when we get to chapter 27, we'll see that Nāgārjuna is suggesting something about the divine, which falsified my prejudice that I'd had for at least 10 or so years against religion in general. For example, Nishijima Sensei started calling the people who kind of agreed with him venerable, and people who didn't agree with him, regardless of whether they had the ceremony to become a monk or receive the Dharma from him, that wasn't really what was important to him. The important thing was, did they accept his view? And people who showed any tendency not to accept his view, Nishijima Sensei in his old age called them Mr. So-and-so, as opposed to Venerable so-and-so. The venerable ones were the ones who accepted his view. And so, I noticed people would call me Mr. Mike Cross, and then, somebody, and so, of course, Brad Roshi, Warner Roshi, gets the highest accolade, and then there's, Venerable so-and-so and Venerable so, and then Mr. Mike Cross. It's small potatoes in the bigger scheme of things, but it connected with what I was really resentful about, which was really being taught a false teaching as if it was the truth. That was what really I resented, and it's what makes me angry now when I see teachers. I was talking about Issho Fujita. Issho Fujita, I think, is an extremely nice guy, and he's a very sincere man. But I know, because I've got a lot more experience in Alexander work than Issho has, how easy it is to think you understand what inhibiting and directing mean, what Alexander work mean, and what they really mean. The truth is that you're always finding out on deeper and deeper levels what you understood before wasn't it at all. So it makes me angry to see people, and again it's the mirror principle I suppose, but the arrogance of thinking that you know when you don't. And when I look back at when I was 27, at least I had the sort of humility to recognise, just the understanding to know that I wasn't ready to receive the Dharma, I wasn't qualified to receive the Dharma. And eventually I did receive the Dharma when I was 38, but it was more to be honest, it was more a sort of a feeling of FOMO, fear of missing out. You're watching all these other people receiving the Dharma who hadn't got a clue. I thought I might as well receive it, but very unsatisfactory situation. And the root of it was Nishijima Sensei didn't understand the teaching of emptiness. So for him, enlightenment was seeing what is as what is. God is God. Dharma is Dharma. But there's a basis in what Nāgārjuna is saying for actually people thinking again about what God might mean, because in the same way, since studying MMK, I've changed my ideas. I've dropped off my former idea about what Dharma might mean, because the word in English, which seems to me to hit the target now, and it never struck me before, because I'd assumed Dharma meant reality, or the reality of sitting meditation. Zazen is the Buddha Dharma. That's very clear in Shobogenzo. But still, my conception of Zazen, of course, I understood it as practice, but I didn't understand what the Buddha meant when he said that all samskaras are impermanent and full of suffering, and all dharmas are not self. So I'd understood all dharmas are not self on the basis of sort of systems theory that I studied at university. I remember explaining that to a class in Birmingham and that I was invited to speak to in end of 1989. And I remember saying that if you can't imagine yourself being anywhere without an environment. You know, you imagine yourself, you always have to imagine yourself in an environment. But that was something I was groping towards emptiness, but I was still basing my thoughts on systems theory. And systems theory is not the same as emptiness, because systems theory is about systems interacting. But emptiness says there is no system separate. There are no two systems which interact with each other, because things can only interact if they have their own separate existence. They have their own self-existence. So, I was getting there back in 1989 when I look back on it, but it's different. What Nāgārjuna's explaining or clarifying about emptiness is different from systems theory. So the point is that what Nāgārjuna is clarifying here is that dharmas are happenings, and so the Buddha Dharma, sitting meditation, is the Buddha happening. Buddha Dharma means Buddha happening, the awakened happening, and so similarly with God, if God is the absolute zenith of rightness, the distillation of being right, then God is truly like Richard Dawkins said, it's just a delusion. There is no God like that. But if God is empty, then, so if God, in other words, is a happening rather than a thing, it takes me back to when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and I went to the church to find out how I had a intuition that I wanted to learn how to pray. Because my mother used to tell me that God was everywhere, always looking at me. I found out later on that was just a way of manipulating me, just to make me behave well. Another kind of source of resentment, I don't like being lied to by people who people win your trust, and then they win your trust that they're telling you the truth, then they tell you a pack of lies. I resent that. I resent experts. When I was about 18 months old, I had testicular torsion, and a locum doctor diagnosed it as mumps. And I think I got antibiotics. I found this out when I was at university. I went to see the student medical doctor. Was it student medical office? They called it the doctor there, Dr. Burton, and he was an expert. He had actually a somewhat unhealthy interest in male genitalia, but that's a different story altogether. But he'd written a paper on testicular torsion, so he was an expert on it, and he showed me the paper. And he said, all you have to do, if a child or person suffering from testicular torsion, you just get the testicle and twist it back, and the pain is gone. But instead, this locum doctor misdiagnosed me. It was on my medical notes. And I just screamed and screamed for about 2 days, and then the testicle atrophied. The blood supply was cut off, and so the screaming stops, and so they must have thought, the problem was solved. So I haven't got any conscious memory of that, but again, when I talk about the depth of my resentment, on some level I haven't forgotten it. I was crying out, trying to tell people something that was true, and people weren't listening to me. And it's just the same now. Go on YouTube. What I'm saying, people should listen. People who think they're interested, people who think they're studying Master Dogen's teaching, especially if they're basing it on Shoba Genzo, that Gyudo Nishijima and I translated it, they'd be well advised to listen to these videos. But I see no views on the ones I've recently uploaded. And it's just the same, mate. That's what was happening yesterday. It's, for fuck's sake, will someone listen to me, And I think sometimes to sort of relive that trauma in some way, I express myself in a way that people won't listen to me. It's like my wife says, I tend to send people away. So there you go. But what I'm doing now is in danger of being the Mike Cross who looks at Mike Cross, analysing oneself, which is not the same as forgetting oneself, dropping off body and mind. And so that analysis of oneself is like being two people, okay? And then, so what do you do if there's two of you? The one who's behaved badly and the one who regrets it, or the one who's been heroic and the one who celebrates it, or whatever. So the Buddha's teaching with that is, well, you forget yourself, you drop off body and mind by devoting yourself to some task, you forget yourself. But the false teaching is so the true teaching is the ekatve. In oneness, there are no two people. Okay, so in oneness, one takes the backward step of turning light and letting it shine. But in two-ness, if there's two of you, then you have psychotherapy or body work. Then there's the one who's got the problem and the one who's going to solve the problem. So then, if you're divided like that, and based on the wrong conception, it's man against himself, which is a book Nishijima Sensei liked by Carl Menninger, Man Against Himself. Again, I'm digressing. The point is, what this verse is saying is there is no cutting off. So, more literally, cutting off is not found. Chedanaṃ is cutting off, from the verbal root chid, to cut off. Chedanaṃ, the act of cutting off. Na vidyate is not found. So the cutting off is not found. And then genitive of śirasaś, that's genitive of shiras, head. And dvitīyasya is genitive of dvitīya, second. Na dvitīyasya śirasaś chedanaṃ vidyate yathā. Yathā is just as. So just as there is no cutting off of a second head. So again, said it for the last several verses. In fact, that's probably why I'm getting more and more kind of dogmatic. I'm fed up. It's like he's building and building, again and again. It's on the surface, it's ontology, but below the surface, he's saying something much more, something which has got nothing whatsoever to do with Sideris and Katsura's translations. Put it that way. They're prize-winning bullshit about, because it's purely on the level of ontology. That's part of my, you can say you can judge me as good or bad, but if there is a God looking down, well, that's non-empty terminology. If God is the Buddha Dharma happening, then this is not serving God whatsoever. It's serving the wrong ideas of the intellectually arrogant, J. Garfield and the like, who've kind of got prestige by definitely not understanding what Nāgārjuna is saying. So here's the ontological translation by Sideris and Katsura. On the other hand, api, not really doesn't mean on the other hand, it does not hold, so na upapadyate, I would say it is not possible, that an entity that does not exist, so that's asato bhāvasya, asato bhāvasya. An entity that does not exist is undergoing cessation, nirodha. So more literally, if we go the ontological route, there's cessation, nirodha, nominative singular masculine, of a non-existent thing, asato bhāvasya, or they've said, they've changed the grammar. The cessation of a non-existent thing, nirodha asato bhāvasya, is again, api, impossible, na upapadyate. So in the original order, asato pi na bhāvasya nirodha upapadyate. The cessation of a non-existent thing is again impossible, just as there is no cutting off of a second head. So, on the other hand, it does not hold that an entity that does not exist is undergoing cessation, just as there is no cutting off of a second head. So we've got exactly the same second line. The difference is their understanding is ontological. So you can't, a non-existent thing can't be destroyed, can't be stopped in the way that there's no cutting off of a second head. It's an ontological assertion. Yeah? So if we go beyond ontology to what really matters, which is practice, then what's it saying? Death, nirodha, is impossible, na upapadyate, again, api, for a living being, bhāvasya, who is beyond being right, asataha. Death is impossible again for a living being who is beyond being right. Now, I translated this like that after my tirade yesterday, when I very clearly demonstrated myself with my foul and abusive language as a living being who is definitely not right. So in some ways, I take that as a good sign that I was sort of heading in the right direction, because I'm basically just responding to what Nāgārjuna is saying in a way that it means something to me. And, without trying to justify my own imperfection, that kind of line is sort of saying, don't worry, don't worry about good and bad. Let others judge whether your efforts are right or wrong. The real truth is that the Buddha Dharma is a happening which is beyond good and bad, beyond right and wrong. So hence Master Dogen says in Fukan Zengi, Zen naku o mawazu zehi o kansuru koto nakare. Zenaku, good and bad, o mawazu, not thinking. Zehi, right and wrong. Kansuru koto nakare, don't care. Don't care about right and wrong. Don't think good and bad, don't care right and wrong. Because we want something to happen, which is, we want to allow a happening which is not, which is obstructed really, which thinking about good and bad, right and wrong, get in the way of it. And again, you look at some of those Old Testament stories, and there is a kind of aspect of that, where God is not really interested whatsoever in the judgments of human beings. It's again, be still and know that I am God. It's sort of saying, shut the fuck up, you don't know what you're talking about. It has that aspect to it. So another way of translating the first line, death is impossible again for a non-true living being. So that in that case, asataha means non-true, in the same way that hibutsu means a non-Buddha, and a non-Buddha is a Buddha, but not what you thought was a Buddha who transcends your pathetic judgments. You who are not still, but are worrying about this, that and the other, and thinking you understand this, that and the other. So death is impossible. Nirodha na upapadyate. Na nirodha upapadyate. Again, api, for a non-true living being. Asato bhāvasya. So again, we see a translating bhava here as living being. Not a thing, not a non-existent thing, asato bhāvasya, but a non-true living being. So I'm understanding what this verse is really about is something empty, a true living being that's called a non-true living being. Do you see the difference? The irony is that they're talking about an entity that does not exist, asato bhava. But originally genitive, so of or for an entity that does not exist. Below the surface means of or for a living being that is non-true. And in the same way, death is impossible again for a non-existent living being. And in that case, non-existent can again mean, non-existent can mean really living, but not existing as you conceive existence. So, just before I switched on the camera, I was looking back in. I was remembering Asvaghosa's phrase, Amritam Padam, the deathless step, or Ajaram Padam, the deathless step. So I used a search function and found it in several places. The risk of going on too long again, I'm going to read them out. So Buddha Charita, chapter 5, verse 75. If you haven't got this book yet, you can get it at Lulu, and that will cheer me up. It's always nice to see someone buying the book. So chapter 5, verse 75, we have the word Amritam Padam, and it's the Buddha talking to his horse, Kantaka, I think the horse's name was. Often indeed has a lord of the earth expelled enemies while riding in battle on you, so that I too might realize the deathless step. Please, O best of horses, act. So deathless step, amritam padam. You see, if you're thinking Nāgārjuna, for damn sure he would know this off by heart. So, against that background, might he have had that in mind when he wrote about nirodha upapadyate. Death, or nirodha is death or cessation. Na upapadyate, it's not possible. Asato bhāvasya, for a living being who is asato, beyond being right, or non-true, not concerned with existence, transcending existence. In other words, transcending fucking ontology. See, that asato could mean that. You know, here we are at verse 31, and we're fucking sick to death of Siddhartha and Katsura's crappy explanations about existence and non-existence, following in the footsteps of J. Garfield, who thinks he's so bloody clever. So, in that, he's kind of primed us to understand asato in that sense, beyond existence, beyond ontology. Death is impossible again for a living being who is beyond their ontology. I think I might add that as another translation. So how is death impossible? Well, death is impossible for a being who's empty, because a being who is a happening is anutpadam, anirodham, anutpadam, as in the very opening words of the dedicatory verses. Anirodham, anutpadam, beyond death, beyond birth. So, pratitya samutpadam, prapanchopashamam shivam, that teaching is beyond death, beyond birth. So, a living being who is identified with that teaching, you want to say identified is the wrong word, when there is only that teaching, there's no separate living being, then what's happening is beyond death, beyond birth. So in that sense, death is impossible for a living being who is beyond being right, beyond ontology. And such a living being has lost himself or herself in amritam padam, the deathless step. So mritam means mortal, dead, and amritam means deathless or immortal. And often the amritam means the deathless nectar of the gods. That's another meaning of amritam. Which so carrying on to the next instance of the deathless step. So in Buddha Charita, Canto 12, we have the visit to Arada, and but the quotation in question comes at the end of 4 verses in which the Buddha it begins by saying, still more, with a view to increasing his bodily strength, on this did he meditate further. So these are this is the conclusion of the Buddha's meditation, where he thinks to himself, through meditation's progress are obtained dharmas, timeless teachings, by which is realized the deathless. That hard-won, quieted, unaging, ultimate, immortal step. So again, the deathless is amritam and step is padam. Padam means foot or step. So the deathless step. Through meditation's progress are obtained or are realized happenings by which is realized the deathless step. The deathless step, see, I would translate dharmas again differently, or at least I would translate it rather than leave it untranslated, and I would translate it as happenings. So there you go. In another few years' time, I might be looking at what I'm translating now in MMK and think that it needs changing. But seeing as this is an exploration rather than exercise in trying to be right, that's fine. So in Soundarananda, Canto 3, it describes the Buddha's awakening like this. Sitting there, mind made up, as unmovingly stable as the king of mountains, he overcame the grim army of Mara and awoke to the step which is happy, irremovable and irreducible. So again, padam shivam aharyam avyayam. So the word deathless then appears in the next verse. Sensing the completion of his task, the denizens of heaven, whose heart's desire is the deathless nectar, buzzed with unbridled joy. But Mara's crew was downcast and trembled. So we've got the word deathless again. Amrita manaso divāvasya. Divāvasya means the denizens of heaven, sky dwellers. And amrita manasa means their mind is the deathless. Their desire is the deathless. So I translated it here, the deathless nectar, but that could also be the deathless step. Later in that same chapter, on verse 10, awake to the one great ageless purpose and universal in his compassion, he proceeded in order to display the eternal deathless nectar to the city sustained by the waters of the Varana and the Asi, to Varanasi. So again, I've translated it. Here we got ajaram, which means ageless, and then we've got amritam, which I've translated as the deathless nectar. Nityam, eternal, amritam, deathless nectar. But the eternal deathless could also refer again to the amritam padam, because when you think about what is truly deathless, there is no thing which is deathless. Samskaras, things, are impermanent and full of suffering. What's truly deathless is empty of its own self-existence, and that is dharmas, in other words, happenings. And so the conception which I find useful is amritam padam. What's truly deathless is the step, the backward step of turning your light and letting it shine. And then in Soundarananda, Canto 14, Soundarananda, Handsome Nanda, Canto 14, there's a long series of verses praising mindfulness or awareness, smriti. The deathless nectar is lost to him whose awareness dissipates. The nectar exists in the hands of him for whom awareness pervades the body. Kaya gataha kayagata smriti. So smritihi is nominative singular feminine. Kayagata is nominative singular feminine. Gata means pervading, going through. Kaya, the body, the whole person. Kayagata smriti. Lovely phrase that immediately brings to my mind Marjorie Barlow's "the whole body informed with thought." Kayagata smriti. The deathless nectar is lost to him whose awareness dissipates. The nectar, amritam, exists in the hands of him for whom awareness pervades the body. So the nectar, or the step, there's no non-empty nectar anywhere. The nectar of the gods is a metaphor for the deathless step, and the deathless step might be the backward step of turning our light and letting it shine. So a couple of verses later in Canto 14 we do have the phrase deathless step, padam amritam. He who has lost the right track, sanmarga, has lost the deathless step, amritam padam. Having lost that nectar of deathlessness, he is not exempt from suffering. So there's a kind of medical metaphor at play there, that if you obtain the nectar of deathlessness, it's like a medicine, which the dew of the gods, which it makes you immune from suffering. Okay, so that is the end of searching for deathlessness in Buddha Charita and Soundarananda. Asato pina bhāvasya nirodha upapadyate dvitīyasya śirasaś chedanaṃ vidyate yathā. Death is impossible again for a living being who is through with ontology. Just as there is no cutting off of a second head. And the thing I wanted to emphasize about the second line is on the surface, again, it's an ontological proposition, but below the surface, he's saying for a person for whom death is impossible, because that person understands that the Buddha Dharma as an empty happening is beyond birth and death. It doesn't have a starting point or a finishing point because it's empty. For that person, there is no second person, to use Master Dogen's phrase. There is no second person. When that person has lost in sitting practice, in just sitting, there is no second person. In that sense, there is no cutting off of a second head.
asato pina bhāvasya nirodha upapadyate dvitīyasya śirasaś chedanaṃ vidyate yathā.